Welcome or welcome back, everybody, to another exciting episode of Aaron's Opinion, the podcast for blind people where we speak about critical issues in the blindness community and all other issues from across the universe and galaxy. Today, we are joined by Disability Deep Dive. Jodi and Keith join us today. Just a week ago, I was on Disability Deep Dive. I was on your podcast, and then you both nicely returned the favor, as we say. So what can you tell me? Basically, what I would like you to do over the next rough hour and a half is basically go through who each of you are as people and how you developed Disability Deep Dive into what it is today. So I will certainly mute my microphone and sit back and listen to you. So go right ahead, and either one of you can start. Go right ahead.
Up to you, Jodi. You want to start or do you want me to start?
I'll let you start since you started the podcast.
Okay. So my name's Keith Casabon. I'm the communications manager at Disability Rights Florida, and about 9 years ago now, we decided to start a podcast. So that actually began through we had just gotten a new grant called the Protection and Advocacy for Voting Access Grant, or PAVA, PAVA for short, which was part of the Help America Vote Act legislation that was passed, I think in 2002, sort of as a result of the fun 2000 election. We would just say that, that sort of debacle. So Help America Vote Act had all these new regulations and rules on voting and how you can vote and not vote. And a big chunk of it was to give the state protection and advocacy agencies, which is what Disability Rights Florida is for Florida. Every state and territory has one. So I think there's 56 of them, 56, 57. So that money was going to go to all the different states, organizations to help people with disabilities get out and vote. Part of the whole legislation was that there'd be accessible voting machines and all these and all the voting locations and such. And so, we sort of helped make sure that that was the case, and that, there was training and so on. And also then just helping people with disabilities learn how to advocate to vote for themselves, get to the polls, use the accessible equipment, and so on. And one of the things we decided to do to help promote some of that was to build this website, start a podcast, do all these different sort of media adventures. And so the podcast, was a lot later than when the bill was passed in 2002. I think we kind of got the program started in 2004, 2005. But as part of the 2016 election, we wanted to do something a little different and try to get the word out in some different ways. And someone we were working with suggested a podcast. And, at the time, there were certainly podcasts out there, but it was, maybe a little different than it is today. And that there seem to be a lot more now, but there's also more of there's more science behind it. People understand the SEO of podcasting now better, and there's real strategies and things like that. Back then, it felt like there really wasn't any strategy, and it was just sort of get a microphone and publish it and see what happens. And so that's kind of what we did. We planned these 4 episodes near the end of 2016. They were all about voting, different aspects of voting. We had a guest. It was highly scripted. It was very different, very, very different than what we do now. The audio quality, especially the first one, is just trash. When you go back and listen, it's just wow. But that's kind of what got it started. And so then after those first 4 voting related episodes, and then the 2016 election happened, we were well, we didn't just create a podcast to do that. So we've got to figure out where we're going to go next. So, and by the way, so that podcast was called You First, the Disability Rights Florida podcast. And which is a mouthful, but we just referred to it as You First. But the challenge there was that if you just said you first, it's okay, you first for what? What does that really mean? Anyway, we started, thinking of some of the topics to talk about on the podcast, getting some other guests, and it kind of grew and changed over the years. I'd say in the last 5 to 6 years is when it really got good. We really started building up, the process of how to make these episodes, started doing them a lot more regularly. We were really not even doing them very regularly before. And it became a lot better. Then, few months ago, a little more than a few months ago now, I guess, my previous co-host, who was a staff person at Disability Rights Florida, Maddie, she moved on to bigger and better things. And so we took a little pause from the podcast. And we, in the process, hired Jodi. And between the two of us, we sort of rethought the podcast a little bit, changed the name to Disability Deep Dive. And we've recorded 4 episodes so far, 2 of which are actually live, and more to come, and bigger plans, moving ahead. So that's all the backstory stuff that I can provide. So Jodi, why don't you fill in some of the more, more recent stuff and your input, and yeah.
Sure. I'm Jodi Beckstein. I'm the social media and content specialist at Disability Rights Florida. I'm new to this arena and podcasting, but it's really been an eye opener for me, and I'm really excited to be doing it. I'm hoping that the change that we made with the rebranding is something that people can really just latch onto and really want to listen to. We're trying to do more of a mix of experts and self-advocates, and really just diving into the nitty-gritty of the disability space. So it's been really exciting. I've learned a lot. I come from a film background, so now working with just audio and just the voice is a little different, but I'm kind of getting the hang of it and really enjoying it.
Thank you. Excellent. So my first question, really to both of you to answer is, that's actually really interesting. I didn't know that we'd be talking about accessible voting. That's an interesting, a very interesting and odd segue into what would develop into a podcast. I think that's really important because very few people actually, young people especially, really don't feel the importance of voting. And especially with people with disabilities, I think it's even more feel that their vote doesn't count. So I think that's really good. Both of you said, gave me a lot of really good questions. Jodi, back to you. So you said that you come from a film background. I never would have guessed that. That's really interesting. So I've recorded a lot of episodes actually here about film, the film industry, acting, things like that. So what did you do in the film industry, by the way?
I went to film school. I learned the back end of production. It was not your typical type of film school. We learned how to be gaffers and, work on the set as opposed to creating our own films. So I learned the technical aspects of filmmaking, which was really interesting and exciting. I spent most of my time doing script supervising, and production management. Is kind of what I kind of latched onto in school. So I did that for a while and then had children, and kind of the film industry kind of went to the wayside a little bit. And then I started picking up doing communications and social media. And that's how I came into that realm from the film realm.
All right. Well, I think you'll find that there's a lot of similarity actually between what you're doing now and what you might have been able to do in the film industry. Yeah, I've spoken to a lot of directors, actually, several directors here on Aaron's Opinion. They've all said basically the same sentence, that it's very, very difficult to get into film. It's incredibly hard to actually get a job doing it. You can do it as a hobby, but it's a very, very difficult job when you're actually doing it as a career. So, yeah.
Definitely, especially if you're come at it from having a disability, makes it that extra little hurdle that you have to get over, which makes it very difficult.
Yeah, there are several blind film producers, but it is very, very, very difficult. So that is very, very interesting. Absolutely. So on Disability Deep Dive, you guys have covered a lot of things. I didn't know it was only 4 episodes. It seemed like it was a lot more than 4 episodes, by the way, in the list on Spotify. But you guys have had a lot of great experts on there. You had that professor just a couple weeks ago, one of the more recent ones. That was a really, really good episode. The person from Florida State or Southern Florida, one of those
Mm-hmm.
universities.
Yeah.
Yeah, you guys have covered a lot of things. So, what experts have you spoken to on Disability Deep Dive, and what topics have you covered, and things like that? Really, kind of break it down. Yeah.
Sure. Well, and we have been around for quite a while. As Disability Deep Dive, we've only had the 2 new episodes, but prior to that, as you first podcast, there have been, I'm not even sure what the count is. I mean, I think it's probably in the 90s. So, yeah, I mean, we have done, a good bit out there. I mean, we've talked to a lot of different people. I mean, um, one of the most, I think important episodes we did, and, it was a couple years ago now, but it was an episode on, the intersection of disability and reproductive justice. It was right at the time when Roe v. Wade was overturned. And so we kind of put this together relatively quickly. We had a panel of 4 guests. Their names are Keith Jones, Heather Watkins, Rebecca Coakley, and Morenike Giwa Onaiwu. And it was a really a very, very passionate discussion on the topic, and really just it's one of the best episodes I think we'd made. And it was really cool in other ways too, because we had a professor ask us if he could include it in his syllabus, that people have to listen to that, his students had to listen to that episode. I forgot what he taught, but it was related. I can't remember the subject. And it just got a lot of push, a lot of play. And I think I haven't checked recently, but I think it's still probably our most listened to episode. So that's one that has always, really, really stood out to me. Yeah, we've talked to a lot of different people. I don't want to, another great one in my opinion, and then I'll turn it over to Jodi. Was some time ago. Gosh, this was when we first were trying to get really good guests and move beyond where we had started, which was mostly talking to staff and friends, to Rights Florida, that sort of thing. So we wanted to sort of spread out and try to find guests that were outside of that circle, if you will. And one of the first ones that we got was my screen is totally blanking on me right now. So I'm trying to get to the episode, and of course right now, our own website is not even working, so that's really frustrating. But anyway, her name, oh my God, I'm so sorry. I'm trying to figure out my computer thing at the same time as talking, and I'm not very good at multitasking. Her name was Elizabeth Wright, and she's Australian. In fact, she was a Paralympian. I forget what year, but she was a swimmer, and I think she won silver. But from there, she did TED Talks and kind of got big. And now actually, she moved to England. So when I talked to her, she lived in England, and now she's back in Australia as a news reporter. I want to say actually sports reporting for I don't know how Australian TV works, but I know it's sort of like British TV, where it's state run stuff. So it's the I think it's the Australian Broadcasting Company or network or something like that. But she does that's what she does now. But the episode was about eco-ableism and how because she'd written an article about the subject and how we're hurting the planet, essentially trying to some of the things that we say we're going to do to solve global warming are noble ideas, but sometimes the decisions we make are actually hurtful for people with disabilities. And one of the classic arguments there is the paper versus plastic straws. And so the idea of banning plastic straws because it creates waste that is in our landfills and such. okay, noble idea, but there's a lot of people with disabilities that actually really depend on having plastic straws available to them, because the paper straws will dissolve and things like that, and it doesn't really work well. People have aspirated trying to, use a paper straw. And so, we're talking about something that I don't remember the statistics, but it was like a tenth of a percent or something of the impact of waste, where there were other things that we could be certainly focusing on, beyond that. And, so let's save the planet, but let's not do it in a way that's going to harm people with disabilities. So that was really great talk. And another one that was, a pretty popular episode, and we run it as an encore once before. And, so yeah, I mean, those are a couple examples of some, really great guests and kind of big topics that we tried to cover.
My, is limited in what I know we've only done a few episodes, but, for me, the one that was scary to me, getting ready to do was when we had Katie Hassan on. She was the associate director of the Center for Genetics and Society. She was talking about the ethics of innovation and, which was disability, technology, and reproductive justice. And so when we started talking genetics, I kind of went, oh, I don't know that I'm going to be able to understand this. I'm going to be able to wrap my, head around this subject. But she was able to break it down, and this nuanced topic, she was able to break it down for us. And it was so easy to understand. And, she was telling both sides of the coin. It was just, for me, that was such a really, rich and interesting topic for us to hit and do. And we have one coming up that's kind of close to me. It deals with ableism in school mascots. There's a group called More Than a Mascot, and Mascots Matter. They are talking about high schools that still use the term midget as their mascots. And as a person with dwarfism, there's people that have issues with it and then don't. But for me, it's a very personal episode. And I'm usually the only one talking about it in my friend group, because I'm not, friends with that many people with dwarfism. But to hear other people's take on it, someone with dwarfism and someone who has a child with dwarfism, and you think it's just the mascot. They had mentioned things in there about how, a lot of elementary schools use, like, for instance, if their mascot was like a buck, they would be like, these are Bucky Bucks and you can earn them for good behavior and whatever. But when your mascot is midget and you're earning these little, what they call midget bucks or whatever they use, how, just even the classroom, it's not just a mascot. Now it's being taught in the classroom, and this behavior is brought forward more and more. So to me, that was a deep and personal episode. So I'm excited about what's coming down the pipe for us with new guests that we have on the show, that we're kind of running the gamut from really complex ideas to really just basic core ideas about ableism. And I'm excited about that.
Sure, absolutely. All of that's very interesting. Let's go back to something that you both were mentioning, the episode in regards to reproductive rights and that whole intersection, as you said, between disability and reproductive rights. So surely I remember the Supreme Court ruling case a few years back, and I remember everybody talking about this topic, certainly. So why don't you walk through that episode a little bit more, because I found that one to be really interesting. What exactly did you learn after recording the episode about, reproductive rights and disability? How does all of these things impact disability? Really break that down. That's really interesting.
Sure. Yeah. And I'll preface real quick by saying that I actually was not on the episode. I ended up, I forget why. I think I was sick or something, and Maddie hosted that one by herself. So of course listened to it, a few times and I'm familiar, but I wasn't, unfortunately, I wish I had of all the episodes, I unfortunately missed, but, it was such a great episode. So I'll just kind of preface by saying that I unfortunately wasn't in that conversation, like firsthand. But, the things that were talked about, like I say, it was really deep. I mean, we talked about, reproductive rights and it grew into things like forced sterilization, um, infanticide, things that were really deep and sometimes dark subjects. So it was, it was very heavy, but at the same time, the four panelists were so well, like, spoken and like relatable that it's not an episode that's hard to listen to, if that makes sense. I mean, I don't want to, I mean, there's parts that can be challenging to listen to. But they present it in such a way, and even throw in their own personality and sometimes even humor in places where you wouldn't expect it. And it's just a really, the conversation is incredible. And like I say, I've gone back and listened to it, several times because it's a really great episode. And I don't have to hear my own voice. So that helps a lot because I don't like listening back to myself, so much. And I edit the episode. So I'm like, okay, once I've heard it back that time, I'm usually good. But this one I'm not on. So it's a lot more fun to listen to. But yeah, they kind of got a little deeper into like how the ruling affects the disability community as a whole, how that there's that intersection that people don't necessarily think about. And honestly, it's a theme we've had for a few years off and on, our episodes regarding, the intersection of disability and something else. Whether that's we're talking about, marriage and families or LGBTQ plus rights, things like that, indigenous peoples, that's sort of a theme where we try to show that disability isn't its own bucket. Disability is a part of, and I know I'm sort of swaying from the episode now, but disability is part of the human condition. And, we've talked before about how the thing about disability is that in a way it doesn't have the same defining characteristics as religion or race or sexual identity and gender, things like that, where you can put it in a bucket, and say, oh, it's this or it's this or it's this. Disability crosses everything. And it even, of course, people who may not have a disability later in life may acquire a disability either from age or injury or whatever, happens. And so, disability is such a deeply rooted, phenomenon, if you will, in a way. I mean, you could, depending on how you want to look at it, that just crosses everything. And so, but it's not looked at that way too often by, people who aren't really familiar with disability and, how it affects and interacts with these other, like race and gender and so on. So that's something we really have made a point of, calling out, and even in things like reproduction and genetics and, you might not think about some of these things, but there's an intersection there, and people with disabilities, definitely are affected by, rulings like Roe v. Wade, that on the surface, you may not see it as, it's not a disability subject per se, but we try to show that almost everything to some degree can be looked at as a subject related to disability, and show how that interaction is and how, one conversation about one group will affect another. So I know it's not exact. I kind of didn't straight from the episode and talked more about the bigger picture of the intersectionality with disability. But I think this one became one of those popular episodes because it really showed something that is unique, of a subject that people don't think about regularly. And it was very timely because, of course, Roe v. Wade being overturned, this was a great conversation to throw out there. But yeah, it really gets, I know they get into racism, ableism, in that episode, and it's really, really intense, and it's such an informative listen. I recommend it. And, everyone who has any interest in the subject of, of disability and civil rights, listen to the episode. It's really good. And the four guests are just incredible.
And Katie touches on that a little bit in the last episode that we did of the podcast, where she was talking about how important it is when making these laws, when making these decisions, when doing this innovation, whether it's with technology or, genetics, to make sure that people with disabilities are at the table, are having these discussions, that you're talking to them, how these things affect them. Because a lot of times, she even said, I believe she said, disability or disease doesn't equate disability. Like, just because you're disabled doesn't mean that there's something that inherently needs to be fixed about you, which I thought was an important point that she was making. But again, the fact that it crosses through disability, and so many times people are not at the table that really need to be there to have these discussions and make these laws and talk about this forward movement of technology.
Absolutely. And the other big problem that I repeatedly see is that you both are doing an excellent job advocating for people with disabilities. That's never a problem, to do the right thing. That's always the right thing to do. The problem is that there are far too many people who are disabled who are willing to sit back and not advocate for themselves. And that's a serious, serious problem. So this is why lawmakers never really seem to always include people with disabilities when they pass these various laws, But back to your point, Keith, I think what you would agree is that people with disabilities are not immune to changes in Supreme Court rulings, whether it's about, reproductive rights or not. People with disabilities are always included. If they live here, they're always included, and that's a very subtle and a very important thing, definitely.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, for sure.
And then that other person you mentioned who spoke a lot about the environment, certainly people with disabilities are impacted by environmental choices, such as, the plastic straws versus paper straws and things like that. I mean, I've heard of that. I mean, I always prefer plastic. The paper straws are unusable. I don't know why we continue to do that. It just makes a bigger mess, personally. And I don't think it's any better for the environment. It really isn't. 1 second. What I will say is that, these little environmental things, though, can be really, blown out of proportion sometimes. And back to I forget which one of you said it, but whoever mentioned the part about how, schools and mascots need to be appropriate. Yeah, they definitely do. And if you're coming up with a name, for basically a derogatory slur for a disabled person as a mascot, maybe you shouldn't go to that school. Maybe that's a bigger statement about the school system. Yeah, I don't ever remember. Luckily, where I grew up in Maryland, I don't really remember any strange mascots. But it certainly does not surprise me that you guys have seen that. Yeah, that's also very, very interesting. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So what? Yeah. What other strange mascot names have you guys heard of over the years? Because that's really weird stuff. Yeah.
This is the only one that I have heard particularly. I mean, we all have heard the use of indigenous mascots, even in professional teams. But I had only heard about the use of the term midget before. They go back very far, and there's a lot of tradition, in these mascots. The one school in particular, I don't know the name of it, but it was, I believe, in the 20s or 30s. They were the underdogs. They beat this really big team. It was a very David and Goliath type of situation. This was before, they had a mascot. So, the term midget is, the underdog, the smaller than the, whatever. So there's a lot of misplaced pride in their mascot. So that's, that's what you're up against when you're trying to say, well, this is the term, this is why the term's wrong, this is why the term's hurtful, this is why the term's ableist, and you get hit with this wall of, but it's tradition, and we've done this since the 30s, and you're taking out, the tradition of our hard-earned win that we had, our David and Goliath story. So it's very hard to change that mindset. I found it very interesting in that conversation, but I haven't really heard myself. I don't know about you, Keith.
No, other than it's not really mascots, but other than like, little leagues or pee wee leagues, maybe also being referred to as a quote midget league. But other than that, I can't think of any other examples. I think, I believe our guest mentioned that there were, I think 4 or 5 schools they identified, I think that were using the term, in their mascots and one had just changed, which was really great. That episode will be coming in about a week. So definitely, listen for that. I don't want to spoil everything.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's all I know of is what they reference. I can't say where I grew up either. I had heard that from any of the schools. I think I don't remember if they make this point or not. I feel like one of the points they do make is that in some smaller districts, you don't really have much choice of where you go. Like there's just like the elementary school, the middle school, and they're all part of the same system. And they just, it's a small town. And so that's where you go. And so, you don't really have much choice in the matter, unfortunately. But yeah, that's where I grew up. It was a little different. So.
Right. But I mean, I know that if I had come home from school as a little boy in the 90s and said, Mom, the school's mascot, they wanted to call the school the Midgets. She would have been like, no, we're not doing that.
Yeah.
It's really weird that I remember this now many years ago, because I had many, many issues with education and things like that. Which, the more you get to know me, the more you'll learn more of my story. But I do remember, it's really weird that I can remember these weird, because it's really inappropriate. That's why I remember. But people remember the stuff that's really inappropriate.
Sure.
When children are like going through schooling and, you have the vocab list and you have to make sentences with the words. I have a memory, and I wonder if my mother still remembers, where I'm sure it was in second grade. Not to say that this justifies it, but the teacher was a minority. And she put the word wimp on a vocab list. And I took that list home, and because you have to write a sentence with each word, and then we got to the word wimp, and my mother flipped out. She's like, "No, we don't use that word. You don't write that word in a sentence at that age." But unfortunately, a lot of times people who work, and I can tell you a lot more one-on-one, but people who work in the education field, in many cases, have a lot of, they're not always there for the right reasons, just to put it very lightly. So this has always been an ongoing issue in my life, advocating for people getting an appropriate education and things like that. And this has always been a problem, these weird little things like that. Yeah. But unfortunately it never really ends. So it's always a constant struggle, Yeah.
Yeah.
One moment. What are some, so yeah, you guys have interviewed a lot of people, but what else can you tell me? And I know that I was asking you a little bit more when I was on your show a week ago. What else can you tell me though more specifically about Disability Rights Florida? So exactly what services do you provide? What do you do? Well, like how does that actually work? Disability Rights Florida.
Yeah. So as I sort of alluded to in the beginning, there's this network of protection and advocacy agencies, or P&As. And the whole thing started in the 70s. There was an institution in New York called Willowbrook, where people with developmental disabilities and other disabilities were housed, institutionalized, and mistreated horribly. we actually did an interview with one of the doctors that worked there, and was trying to make change. And he really goes well in depth into the story of that. So if you're really interested, I'll find the name of that episode in a minute. I think, one of the Kennedys, I forget which one, a senator at the time, he had a relative, I suppose, that was in the facility, and he went firsthand, and he saw the conditions, and was appalled. Um, Also, another thing that sort of drove the movement was, Geraldo Rivera at the time, did this expose. He got inside, and of course, so now on TV, they're showing what it looked like inside, and it was just filthy, and people weren't even dressed, and they were just, like laying on the ground in dirt, and it was disgusting. Um, and so, a movement happened in Congress to allocate money to, to all the states and territories to help protect against that. And that was the first P&A grant, if you will. It was, what's now called Protection and Advocacy for People with Developmental Disabilities, or PAD, PADD. And there are now like 8, or 9, I'm sorry, of these P&A grants out there. But that was the first one. And so agencies were formed. Sometimes they were part of the state. Other times they were, independent nonprofits. And this network grew, of these protection and advocacy organizations. So Disability Rights Florida used to be called the Advocacy Center for Persons with Disabilities. For a long, long time, became Disability Rights Florida. Sort of for the same reason we changed the U first, because Advocacy Center by itself, you hear that and you just go, advocacy for what? So there was a big movement to change the name to Disability Rights, et cetera, or similar. Not everyone follows the exact format. So we became Disability Rights Florida. But I mean, we're almost 50 years old now, as an organization. And so the different grants that we receive enable us to provide, direct advocacy services, to people with disabilities, free of charge. It doesn't matter. Unlike legal aid that has, income requirements, we don't have that. So it doesn't matter how much money you have or don't have. If you have a disability, and your rights are violated, you can come to us and see what we can do. Now, as I said, we're a nonprofit organization. All of the funding comes from these federal grants. And of course, they're very specific in what you can and can't do. So I can't promise that, we can help with absolutely anything. So if you have a disability and you're going through a divorce, well, that's not a disability issue per se. So we can't really help with that. So that's kind of one example of, it's kind of an easy one to provide. But if, you're an institution, or you're not getting home and community-based services, or you're a student, or you're a parent of a child with disability in school who's not getting, a reasonable, accommodation in school, or least restrictive environment, in the school, things like that. And a number of other things, voting access, we mentioned, mental health advocacy, so on. There's so many things we do, throughout those grants. Even representative payees for Social Security. There's a lot of fraud in that area. And so, we investigate that, go to different, institutions and group homes and community living, residences, and we'll, investigate that a little bit, and often find that, these individuals with disabilities who have assigned either the institution as their representative payee, or relatives, friends, anything, they'll discover the fraud that, they're not really giving them all their money. They're taking some of it for themselves. So, that's kind of sort of a unique, relatively newer grant. I think it came out in the late, 2010s. So yeah, it's a wide variety of things we do. So the services themselves can range from, helping with self-advocacy, helping individuals, like how do you, advocate for yourselves. But, we have a lot of attorneys on staff, and we do mediations, negotiations. There are some things occasionally that rise to the level of litigation. And so, sometimes we will go to court and fight, and we've been a part of class action suits before, related to people with disabilities. The other things we do, we have a public policy team that goes to the Florida state legislative sessions and, advocates for people with disabilities as laws are being created. So that's another big step. We try to do a lot of legislative advocacy. And then, of course, education, information, communications, those things as well. Aaron, you mentioned how important self-advocacy is. I mean, we've done webinars on self-advocacy, how to help people, learn good techniques to advocate for themselves. We have a resource on our website all about self-advocacy, and this sort of 10 steps program, if you will, the 10 steps toward, self-advocacy. So, so that's how, if anyone listening is interested, disabilityrightsflorida.org/10 steps. That'll take you to those pages. So yeah, I mean, I think that's, one other really big thing that is very unique to the state P&As is something called access authority. So our grants give us what's called access authority, which means we can go into any institution, hospital, group home, et cetera, where there are people with disabilities. We can go in and we don't need to be invited. We don't need to be, asked. I mean, we literally could just walk in the door and show this is who we are. This is our authority, and they can't stop us. And that is extremely unique, in agencies like us. So it's a really big deal, and something that, really helps define, I think, what the P&A system is and the things that we're able to do to help people with disabilities. So, it's a really, I mean, it's a great network. It's a great agency. There's funding challenges here and there sometimes. I mean, federal government, different administrations come and go. Sometimes funding can be threatened, but we get through it. And like I say, we've been around for almost 50 years. I've been there for 23. So it's we're resilient. We're going to stick around and be there to help.
Yeah, I have nothing to add. You covered the gamut. With social
Sorry.
media, no,
Should have given you.
that was perfect. For social media, I do social media, I do the blogs, I do the external newsletters. What I try to do is educate on, the grants and the services we offer. But for me, the big push is self-advocacy. I think that's the foundation of it all. You have to be able to self-advocate. So just to kind of tag on what Keith is saying, that's my bread and butter for the social media, and just to, educate what your rights are and how to just ask for them, because a lot of people just don't even ask. They just figure, oh, I don't get that. I don't deserve that. I don't need that. And they just don't ask. So that's kind of what I push for, is the self-advocacy.
Absolutely. Yeah, all of that's incredibly fascinating. And yes, I do know what Willowbrook was. Really, it's going to sound really strange. Have either one of you interviewed or came across the name Bill Krebs?
Mm-mm.
That name
I
rings a
have not.
bell, but we have not interviewed. No.
He was on my podcast a while back, a couple years ago. He's a man with a cognitive disability. And he was never sent to Pennhurst in Pennsylvania, but he knows people who were, and he's an advocate for people with cognitive disabilities. And he is an expert about institutionalism and why it failed and all those things. And he speaks about his whole life in a very beautiful and serious way. And that was a fascinating person that you guys should definitely interview if you ever want to talk about, the history of institutions and things like that. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Wow. Yeah. No, that's wonderful.
I'm really actually impressed and surprised that you were able to even find a doctor from Willowbrook who was still around to this very day, who was still willing to be interviewed about that place, because that was
Yeah.
how
No,
did
for sure.
Pure curiosity. How did you arrange that? Because people never wanted to talk about it after it was shut down. Like, how did you preface that?
Well, I have to say that Maddie was the one that booked. His name was Dr. William Bronston. She's the one that booked him. But I think he had come out with he was still doing talks, and he had written a couple of books. And so he's still actively, advocating for the rights of people with disabilities. And so, but yeah, you're right. I mean, it's he's definitely he's an older gentleman. This happened 50 years ago. And but he's still out there. And yeah, I'm not sure how she got the contact information, if I'm being honest, but yeah, she she was able to get in touch with him. And yeah, his book, the book was called Public Hostage, Public Ransom: Ending Institutional America, which is a really impactful book. It's incredible. Um, and it's another episode that honestly it's another one that's like a content warning, really. I mean, it includes, some strong language, explicit mentions of violence against and the death of people with disabilities, medical trauma, and even eugenics. I mean, is a part of the story. It was really incredible. We talked to him for like an hour and a half, and the name of the episode, by the way, I said I would mention it for anyone who's interested. It's called Willowbrook and the Future of Disability Rights. And it's really, like I say, it's a really, really deep conversation. I mean, we mostly kind of shut up and let him talk because he just had such great stories. And, he just, it's fascinating the inside information that he has, from just the whole Willowbrook story I mean, you know, beginning to end. It's incredible. And he references other great materials out there as well. I mean, there's even I don't know the name offhand, but there's even a book of fiction that someone wrote based in Willowbrook in the 70s. And so it's not a real story, but it's illustrative of the things that happened there. So there's some really fascinating information out there that I was not at all aware of. And like I say, I've been in this, P&A world for 23 years, and I was like, I had not heard of, some of the stuff he had referred to. So it's really good material. And I think anyone with even a fleeting interest in disability or institutionalization and the history of that stuff, even if you're just a history buff, I think in a way you would actually enjoy the episode. It's really great.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You also said that Disability Rights Florida has occasionally gone to court and gone through some legal proceedings to protect people with disabilities and to advocate for people. Are you able to explain any of those various cases that Disability Rights Florida has, participated in?
Yeah, I mean, we were part of some Florida-based Olmstead rulings back when, that's like, I guess 20 years ago or more now. And so, that was huge. We've done some litigation against the Florida Department of Corrections related to treatment of individuals with disabilities. Um, Gosh, I hadn't really thought about this in advance, unfortunately, but yeah, there's, like I say, that we've been involved with a number of, really, class action style, cases that have, hopefully impacted a lot of people in the state, with disabilities and helped them out. Like I say, I hadn't really thought about that before we started talking. So, uh, I can't think of anything else off the top of my head right now, but,
There,
I can look a little bit and yeah, go ahead.
there was the case with we combined with the Florida Health Justice Project for getting medical supplies through Medicaid. That was in October, the incontinence
Yes.
supplies. We had a class action lawsuit against Florida's Agency for Healthcare Administration for that. I know that was relatively recent.
hmm Um, we had a lawsuit against the Florida Department of Children and Families regarding what's called the Baker Act here in Florida. Essentially, it's an institutionalization law that uh, I won't go into the details of the law, but they were kind of failing to track the proper use of the act, and so we there's a lawsuit related to that too. Um, gosh, let's see. Yeah,
Oh, I can.
we've done a lot. I mean, counties, school districts. I mean, it's a broad there's a broad array of litigation that has we've been a part of. We either were co-counsels on or you know the Olmstead decision, like I mentioned. So it's a lot there, and some things are there's some current things obviously can't talk about, but it's a small percentage of the cases we do, but they're the ones that hopefully make really big impacts on large groups of people, and yeah.
Absolutely. And it's the smallest things that we ever do that actually have the biggest impact.
Hmm.
And so that's so accurate and that's so true. Yeah. Yeah. Good. Great. Um, okay. Well, very good. And I think that covers a lot of what you guys are doing. So who are some guests? I mean, you guys have interviewed me, but in general, what are some topics that you want to be able to speak about on your podcast moving forward that you hope to be able to include moving forward? What do you think?
I'd like to see just a wide variety of people. I've got some, people penciled in to kind of talk to, but I want to make sure because, and I've heard the first time I heard this was Keith has said it that disability isn't a monolith. That there's so many types of people, and we talk about the intersectionality of it. I really just want to get the real gamut of disability as much as we can, not just experts, not just advocates, just people with lived experience, people that are doing things for others, people that are making, like you're saying, the small changes. So I got quite a few people penciled in. I'm going to try to do as good as Maddie and get some really good guests for us, but um, I don't have any particular, you know, star in the sky that I'm trying to get.
All right. Okay. That's understandable. Keith, back to you with your background. So, Keith,
Yeah.
you said Jodi explained a little bit more about her film background, but what can you tell me about your background, your educational background, how
Hmm.
you started out?
Yeah. Well, I got my bachelor's in psychology, and then um, kind of just didn't for about a year and a half or so. I was just like, oh, I'm gonna find something to do with a bachelor's in psychology. And a year and a half later, when I couldn't find anything, um, anything that at least felt, I don't know, interesting and something I really wanted to do, I started thinking about graduate school. And around the same time, I was looking into some graduate programs. My father he had a stroke in his brainstem, and he survived, which was it's like a 5%. This is back in the early 90s, so at the time, at least, it was like a 5% survival rate for this, and he survived, but it left him with a number of disabilities. I mean, he was essentially quadriplegic. His vision was poor. His hearing was poor. He couldn't really speak. I mean, it was like this systemic, effect. I mean, it's your brainstem, right? So like all those, you know, like base functions, were affected. What wasn't affected, was his intelligence. He was he was actually he was a chemist. He worked at Boeing back during the space, race and helped develop rocket fuel for the Apollo. I mean, he was a smart guy. And he remained a very smart guy, but it was like he couldn't then, he couldn't communicate. He couldn't, unfortunately, like interact with the world anymore. So it was really like, I don't know. It was impactful. It really just was like, made me, I don't know, think about a lot of different things and change, a bit of the path that I went down. So around the same time that happened, I just happened to get this thing in the mail about this new program that was starting. Louisiana State University. I grew up in New Orleans. Louisiana State University had a medical center in New Orleans, and they were just starting a brand new program, excuse me, called Masters in Vocational Rehabilitation, which I was like on the surface didn't really quite even know what that meant, but as I dug into it, saw that essentially it was for a job that would help people with disabilities get back to work, that kind of thing. And essentially what it was, it's vocational rehab, which I just didn't know the terms. I didn't really know what that was back then. But it was essentially helping to do that vocational rehabilitation work. But it also talked a lot about counseling and being a therapist specifically related to people with disabilities. At the time, that's really what I wanted to do. I had gotten a psychology degree and I wanted to do that, do some kind of, like counseling therapy type work. And the promise of this was that by the time you graduated, you'd have enough hours of that to be, an actual counselor, but you'd have this specialization in disability and so on. I was like, well, that's really, really interesting. I'm going to check into this. And so the program was, we had courses, on like, one course was the psychosocial aspects of disability and, things like that. So there's a lot of disability, curriculum in there. And then there was also a lot of, therapy, counseling, et cetera. But then there was also this vocational aspect of it too. It was a really interesting program. And I feel like I learned a lot. In the end, the promise of being a counselor didn't pan out. I guess it turned out that they didn't provide us with enough of that, hourly stuff, but kind of didn't matter because the last semester was an internship and the internship was with the Louisiana P&A, also called the Advocacy Center at the time. The only two advocacy centers of the 56, groups. I ended up working for both of them. So the Louisiana-based advocacy center is now called Disability Rights Louisiana, along with the trend. But I was an intern, with the client assistance program, which was essentially people who help, with vocational rehab and clients of that who, were not getting help the way they wanted to, came to Advocacy Center. And, the CAP program was the group of advocates that helped fight, for their rights and go met with the vocational counselors and, kind of convince them, what they should do differently to help this person better. So that was my internship. So that got me into the P&A system and I stayed there after graduation, got a quote real job after that and did work there and then later moved to Florida and ended up working with Disability Rights Florida. But that's kind of my path. And so sort of between my father's disabilities and this program kind of just like literally like in the mail just arrived. It all just sort of clicked and put me where I am now. So like, I mean, at the time, I didn't envision any of this. But here I am. And like I say, it's been 23 years in just this place. So, I mean, really, I don't know, many more years than that since I've graduated. But, yeah, so that's my path in a nutshell.
That's great.
Absolutely. It's oftentimes these little things we get in the mail or that one text or that one email where you think, hey, what is this? And then it turns out to be a really good opportunity, and you turned out to be someone, Keith, who you're really interested in it. You really want to help others and it turned out to be a perfect thing for you. So that's really, really good. Yeah. What can you tell me about, your audience? As you said, you've had to rebrand your podcast over the years, but, generally, are you getting downloads from other countries all over the world or just the United States? What have you guys found for your, demographics of who listens to your show?
Yeah, we actually there's some international listeners out there. It's the vast majority is in the United States, but there are other listeners out there, and I think a lot of that we had a while really good numbers in the United Kingdom and also Australia, and I think a lot of that was some of the was that Elizabeth Wright and her notoriety in those countries helped a lot. We interviewed an individual from Nigeria. And so we had some nice, listening, some listeners in that area of the world as well. And, yeah, so, yeah, there's definitely, I haven't checked in a couple months to come to think of it, but yeah, I have noticed that, we do seem to have a, a broad listenership out there, outside of America, mostly English speaking countries, but, yeah, South America, some other places. Yeah, it's around. And we've interviewed people. We interviewed a couple of people, from Brazil. Uh, Gosh, there was an interview. I think she was living in Colombia. So, one of the things that we really tried to do for a while there was get that sort of international perspective and talk to people, outside of, just our country here. And so that's probably helped a lot when it came to that, listenership.
Absolutely. Who did you interview from Nigeria?
I knew you were going to ask me that. So I started, um, I'm so bad. I apologize. I'm so bad with names and I have to like go back and look, because I can remember everything about the conversation, but you asked me a name and I'm like, so I'm like zipping back through, the list of podcasts here and, I will tell you in, well, whenever it decides to, I don't know why my computer is being so bad right now. It's not very nice. Doesn't it know I'm on a podcast right now?
Exactly. That's exactly what it
Gosh.
knows.
Yeah, it's trying to sabotage me. Jeez. Um, all right, I'm just going to a different place to look. Um, Here we go. International Disability Media and Advocacy. Alan Abair. Alan Abair was his name. And I'm sorry, he was Kenyan. My apologies. Gosh. He's a Kenyan journalist, social inclusion advocate, and a behavior change communications professional. Um, and one of his claims to fame is he was the chief executive officer of Black Albinism in Kenya. And so we talked a lot about, the perception of disability, not just in Kenya, but in other parts of Africa. And, it's in a very different place. We actually asked him to give us a translation of something about, and I forget what the sentence was, but it was something, something, something disabilities. And he said, I actually don't want to do that because unfortunately the translated word, for disability is actually still something that's considered like rude or a slur.
Mm.
And I was like really fascinated to hear that. So then I forget what we asked him to translate instead, but I was fascinated to learn that like, yeah, what year was this? 2023, that was still an issue in any part of the world, that there's not even a word for disability in that language that's not considered something derogatory. But
Mm.
um, yeah, that was a really fascinating conversation. I mean, he was also a TV host there, and just a really fascinating individual. A really fun episode that we recorded and learned a lot.
Absolutely. That's amazing. Yeah. Yeah, we can definitely talk off air about some of these various conversations because this is all very, very interesting to me. Truly fascinating. Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, for sure.
So, where do you guys hope your podcast will keep going? What are some of your future goals for your podcast moving forward? What do you think?
Um, for me, I'd like you, touched on international. I would like to see it kind of branch out. I think before with it having maybe the Disability Rights Florida in the name kind of meant that people assumed we were just talking about things that happened in Florida. So I'm hoping with the new rebranding that people start to realize that it's, we're talking globally about things. So that's kind of where I'm hoping that it kind of branches out across the country and then internationally.
Absolutely. Absolutely. All right. All right. Well, I think that covers a lot of what I would always cover on a great episode. So I'm going to start with you, Jodi, or I'll throw it out there and whoever can come up with a great question can go first, but both of you are going to ask a great question. So I'm sure that there are some questions you have about me, Aaron Richmond, and Aaron's opinion. For one thing, what do you really want to know about Aaron Richmond and Aaron's opinion? And if you can ask me only one question to really make me sweat, to see if I'm worth my salt as a podcaster, what do you
Wow.
really want to know about me?
Well, I'll turn the question back on you. Where do you see Aaron's
Sure.
opinion going? Where would you like to see it go?
Continuing to record great episodes more internationally. I've seen a lot of traction overseas, and the fact that I'm getting great guests like you guys, and the fact that you guys are more and more people are reaching to me first, contacting me first. That's a big sign that this Aaron's opinion thing and Disability Deep Dive are two podcasts that are needed in the ecosystem for sure, because people need to be having these great conversations for sure.
Absolutely.
All right. That would be, but if you can ask me, anything else that you really want to know, what do you really want to ask?
Well, it's funny because we asked you so many questions on our episode. So I'm trying to think of what can we ask that would be, different from that. I mean, I would, we're talking a lot here about podcasting and, and specifically disability related podcasting. So like, what would you, all right, here's like a two-part question. Do you have a favorite besides yours or our podcast? Because of course, we're each other's favorites, obviously. But what would you, what is your favorite disability themed podcast? And the other part would be like, what would you advise other people with disabilities to go into podcasting, and why?
I mean, I don't think I specifically have a specific favorite disability podcast. Only
some that stand out. Yeah.
Many of them do. Many of them do. In fact, most of them that are podcasting now and still doing it stand out. That's the overarching reality. The advice that I would give to anybody who wants to get into podcasting, whether they're disabled or not, is to keep an open mind and to really enjoy it. You have to really like building the episodes, because at first, for a few years, nobody listens to you. It takes a very long time to build a community, to build a following, and that's what I would say, is that you have to take baby steps. It's always okay if you're taking baby steps in the right direction. That's what I will tell you. Yeah.
Cool.
Great. Do either one of you have any other questions?
No, I don't think so.
That's totally fine. All right.
Yep.
Well, then in that case, both of you have done an excellent job. I really appreciate you guys coming today and all of that. You guys did a tremendous job promoting your podcast and promoting what Disability Rights Florida does and all of that. So how can somebody get in touch with you guys, the podcast, and Disability Rights Florida? How can you be reached?
Well, if you want to talk about the podcast specifically, we do have an email address, podcast@disabilityrightsflorida.org. So if anyone out there is interested in, has a topic idea or thinks they would be a compelling guest, feel free to email us. We'll get back to you. As far as Disability Rights Florida itself, if you're an individual, in Florida, of course, you'd be a resident of Florida. But if you're in Florida and looking for, some help with a disability related issue, rights violation, things like that, you can contact us directly. 1-800-342-0823 is our toll-free number. Our website is disabilityrightsflorida.org. On there, you can even do an online intake if you prefer to do that instead of, speaking to an intake person through the phone. We'll get back to you in a few days, and see what's available. One thing I could say is even if it's an issue that we don't help with or can't help with for whatever reason, one of the great things about us and all the other P&As, is that we provide information and referral. So if we can't help, we will tell you who we think could. So when you hang up the phone, you've got some other resources to try. And I don't think some agencies do that, but a lot of them don't. And so I think that's kind of really cool that, we don't want to leave anybody empty-handed, when they contact us. I will throw out too, since, that's for Florida specifically, but if you're interested in the services of a different state's, protection and advocacy system, the best way to find the one in your area. So there's the National Disability Rights Network that's sort of like, they're in DC and they're, sort of they're not really a parent agency per se, but they're, sort of our national counterpart. Their website is ndrn.org. And right at the top of the page, at the upper left, or one of the first links you'll discover if you're navigating, with a screen reader or other technology, is a link called Find Your P&A. And when you click on that, it'll give you a little blurb about the network. And then there's a menu of all the different states and territories. And when you select yours, it'll pop up with all the information you need to contact that agency. So you don't have to be in Florida, to find help. And that's the way to, figure out what's the right agency to contact.
And if you just want information and education on how to self-advocate, and what's kind of going on around Florida, you can sign up for our newsletter on our website. We
Yes.
send that out at the end of every month. And we're on social media. We're on Facebook. We're on X. We're on Instagram, and YouTube.
Yep.
Excellent. Very, very good from both of you. All right. Well, hold on one moment. Oh, absolutely. From my heart to yours, I want to say thank you so much for joining me today on Aaron's Opinion. You guys did a great job. Thank you so much, and we will certainly be in contact and all of that. So thank you for joining us today, and I certainly hope that you continue to produce wonderful episodes of Disability Deep Dive. And just thank you so much. You guys did a great job. And until next time, everybody, help one person today, help 1 million people tomorrow.